So you should get a little note. And welcome everybody. I've just pressed record. This is the preparing for, I've forgotten the title. We're looking at universal design for learning practices. And we'll continue on with the activity. Apologies, everybody.
All right, thank you. And we've got some wonderful, wonderful entries here. Presenting stuff, information in multiple formats, beautiful. Acknowledging difficulties, yes, that's very important too. It ties into that other comment about making it safe to fail. And a clear structure is really important too. That's great. There's some really excellent comments there. We might just move on. So feel free to keep entering your thoughts in there. But here's an example of some things that students have said responding to a similar question. And this information is from a project that Gwen Laurie and Jack Lang have been involved with, looking at universal design for learning. And as you can, and on screen it says, can you please name and describe a course and teacher that you think the way that was taught made you feel like you're included? And the top responses are involve every student and encourage participation. And we saw that in the shared sheet before. Be approachable, answer questions, and check on understanding, and be open to different views and opinions. And I think some of those things were also mentioned in the previous session this morning about being approachable and answering questions quickly to keep that discussion going and flow of the exchange of ideas between everybody in the class. So next slide, please, Amber. And part of that work that Gwen and Jack were involved with, they identified these 6 themes that were common in that research. So there was the making changes to accommodate. There was accessible course materials, inclusive teaching, social interaction, feedback, and being approachable. Next slide, please, Amber. And at this point, I might just introduce the Universal Design for Learning guidelines. Now, these look really overwhelming, but I just want to reassure everybody that you're probably doing most of this already. And I've highlighted a few things that is just common practice here anyway. We've got, it's broken down into 3 main areas. So there's multiple modes of representation, and that's about what you're presenting. And multiple means of action and expression, and that's how the communication flow happens between everybody in the classroom. And multiple means of engagement. That's why. Why would students be interested in what they're learning? And yeah, it's really about improving motivation. So in terms of representation, we're already doing live captions here and captioning our lecture recordings here at UQ. So we're offering alternatives to auditory information. In terms of action and expression, we're already using multiple media for communication. So many of you are, you've got important dot points in your slides, and you've also got some visual representation of some of the concepts. And for engagement, optimizing relevance, value, and authenticity. So this is where I know many people, we try and explain what the learning objectives, why they're important, why they're doing a particular assessment item, or what they're learning in the class that week. And there was certainly a lot of discussion about this topic in the previous session. So we've got a question from Luke. The language courses are usually considered the most inclusive or approachable, and Amber said, I don't think students were asked to identify particular courses. Yeah, that's true. So next slide, please, Amber. And
we're a little bit ahead.
okay, great.
Yeah, so we might maybe go back a slide and allow for a few minutes of questions about this guideline, or just let participants explore it a little bit before we move on, if that's okay.
Yeah, great. And also in the vein of multiple modes of engagement, in the sheet that you have a link to, there's a field in there to enter questions about principles you'd like to know more about, and also an opportunity to identify a principle you think you're already following.
Can I jump in just and add a few things about that framework that's there? Sorry, I should say my name's Gwen Laurie. Hello, lovely to join you all here today. So I just wanted to point out that it can seem a little overwhelming looking at this framework. Chris mentioned that before. And all the numbered items under each guideline, they call them checkpoints. And what you'll find is often when you do something in your classroom practice or you're teaching, that activity or resource might address several of these. And it's not intended when you apply the framework for you to go and put everything in your course. You can't really achieve that. But it's about doing what's really good for your students that are in your particular course and classroom at the level that they're at. So the aim really for sharing the framework, and it's used really widely in higher education now, is to help you find something, one or two things that you feel that you're already doing or potentially you could do. We call it low-hanging fruit. As part of changing practice. So it's worth even just taking a screenshot of this if you want to keep it for later. I was just going to add that in as a suggestion if people want to, if it seems a little fast to all the things that we're doing today, we can certainly share that particular resource. Also pointing out, if you go to the website, which we'll give a link for, it's interactive and clickable. So there's lots of suggestions and resources at that website as well.
I see someone's entered into the template, build fluencies with graduated levels of support practice and performance. Yeah. So I think part of this is this ties a little bit to making it a safe space. So I think part of this is if you're what's generally a good practice if you want to promote engagement within a class is to start simple, start with something that doesn't have a direct yes or no answer, but can give students an opportunity to feel like they're not shut down with their response, and then as you go through the semester, ramp up the difficulty in the questions you're asking and what you're asking them to do. We also got a question about facilitating personal coping skills and strategies. How do you do that? So I think part of that is, and please feel free, Louise or Gwen, to jump in. I think part of that is to provide some scaffolding in the assessment, show perhaps some sort of template so that they can break their tasks down into steps and guide them through the process. Is there anything that you'd like to add, Gwen or Louise?
So guidelines 8, 9 are very much about embedding those practices that support students in developing those skills of being able to cope or change their study approaches and self-regulation. So we're going to have some tips a bit later on, but there are broader examples that we can share with you. It might be timely to mention that there will be a workday module that walks everybody through doing inclusive in practice in the classroom, but also brings in examples from UQ practice. I saw a comment earlier about, knowing which courses are considered to be inclusive or where people are considered to be approachable. It's not a generic measure. It's really about the opinions of the students that are in that particular course. So a student in another course might not find the same strategies connect them to what's happening. So there's no ranking list of the best and best inclusive courses at UQ. It's all about what's happening in individual courses with their instructors.
Thank you, Gwen. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think sometimes the word personal could make you think we mean like counselling services, but would you say personal coping skills and strategies is also really, it's about study skills and how long something takes, and that took me longer than expected, and this kind of task has a number of steps that you might need to. So I suspect many of you are already doing that very well, or could include some additional questions like that in tutorials or tasks to help students identify their study skills strategies and what's working for them and what's not. Is that correct?
I think, Chris, was it you that had the interactive framework up before on screen?
Oh, it was me, but I can pull it back up for you. No trouble at all.
If you click through on 9.2, you should get some suggestions that pop up from that. It's useful just to demonstrate that, I think. And there's some...
great.
The website's a great resource.
Yeah, I have not clicked through to that. Amazing.
Yeah, some of the tips are aimed at high school, but they're certainly translatable to higher education.
Wonderful. That's been really valuable. Thanks, everyone. And we're now maybe ready to move on to the next step, which is to share some working examples. So we'll hand over for a quick introduction to Louise and Gwen. Maybe, Gwen, you'd like to go first and tell us a little bit more about yourself?
So hi, that's me.
I'm sure people know you.
And, I'm in the School of Chemistry and Molecular Biosciences, and it kindly says that I got a teaching award. Thank you. And
many teaching awards.
Mentioned by Chris earlier, we've been spent 2 weeks with a teaching innovation grant trying to capture by consultations through the UQ community what inclusive teaching means to academics on campus. So I don't consider myself an expert, but I'm certainly think I can help. And we are developing resources and a workshop and things to help our everybody find the way to enter into UDL that's supportive of what they do in their practice. So I think that's a potted summary.
And hi, my name's Louise Kuschel. I wear two hats. I'm an academic in the School of the Environment. So I'm a teaching focused academic there. And I'm also Deputy Associate Dean Academics in charge of kind of student matters within the Faculty of Science. So part of that faculty role is about supporting students who have different needs in different ways. But also, I've got over 15 years experience of teaching in large first year classes right through to sort of postgraduate level classes. So I'm very familiar with the constant juggling of trying to support students who have different needs and who are very diverse in different ways, as well as organising your course material and kind of dealing with all the admin stuff and trying to juggle all those things in a way that works for students and is manageable for staff. So that's some of the examples I'll talk about today from some of the teaching that I do.
And over to you, Gwen, to share a few ideas.
I'm just closing a loop here because with pointing out the UDL framework and pointing out the checkpoints on it, what we've done here is gone back to that student data and pull together some strategies that might address what students were indicating that was important to them. And so you can see we've also cross-referenced the checkpoints here to help sort of see how it moves across the framework. Students gave a lot of qualitative data in the interviews that we had with them, and the common themes that you saw on the graph before was very much about interactions with the teacher, having opportunity to contribute or ask questions, and interactions with other students. So here are some strategies that you might want to note down if it's something that you could consider. But generally, things like giving students opportunity to be heard in class, encouraging contribution responses from all students. Now, I teach really, really large courses, and so I have large lecture theatres full of students, and your instant reaction might be, how can we listen to every student? But there's some very simple strategies around that, which is not just taking the answers from the ones that stick the hands up at the front, which is very easy to do when you're trying to move on. And I know it's difficult in some of our spaces, but actually moving to different places around the room, or even side to side in the large lecture theatres, and trying to encourage responses from other students is a good idea, or using polling is another way to do that. So that comes to the second point. So the students want to feel that they can interact with the teachers. So moving around that learning space, especially in flat floor spaces, if there's collaborative active learning, workshops or other things going on, only standing at the front really limits interactions with students. And they really, really want that opportunity to have a opportunity is to have an option to contribute. Many students also raised awareness that they recognized some students as shy, and thought that teachers could find ways to do that. So another thing that you could do is increasing the relevance or helping students be invested in what they're doing and included, is at the start of a semester actually getting students to contribute to the context that might be taught, or the examples that could be used in teaching through the semester. That means it's more tailored, and they've had that opportunity to input. So again, it's about that participating or partnering in the teaching. Then also making any connections explicit with assumed prior knowledge. So if you've got a first year course, they're bringing high school knowledge, whether it's maths, physics, chemistry, biology, or other disciplines, actually telling the students what you're assuming that they know already. And if you find out that there's gaps, actually providing resources. You don't need to teach to the gaps, but just providing resources through Blackboard actually gives those students opportunity to address gaps, and they feel that you're including them by giving them chance to be at the same level as the other students in class. Then the last one, it sounds huge, but acknowledging individual differences, value respecting and including, and actually knowing the students, knowing the diversity in the classroom. You can get a lot of information from your class lists. You don't need to single out students, but give them opportunity to share their difference. I saw somebody put in about having names. A really easy thing to do is ask students to use their preferred names, which are now getting shared in your class list as well. And even in an active learning space, using little tents, so when students fold a little piece of paper and putting their name in front so that other students know what name they could use with each other in peer learning, is a really great way to do that, and makes them feel part of what's going on. Thanks. So I'm going to hand over to Louise, who's going to share some examples of what she's doing in her spaces.
Thanks, Gwen. So what I didn't say earlier is I'm actually quite new to the concept of universal design. I sort of first bumped into it last year. But of course, I find it really interesting and really powerful. And what I was interested in, as I got talking with Gwen and as I've been talking with Amber and Chris, is that I realized a lot of what I currently do is actually universal design. And I think, as a teaching, when you're an academic teaching, it can be quite overwhelming to hear the latest new sort of educational concept that's being promoted. But I found universal design quite intuitive. And when I started looking at the framework, I was pleasantly surprised at how much of what I already do sort of fits that brief. Of course, there's always room for improvement. And I think one of the things we'll be encouraging everybody today is to look at, what's one other thing that you could add and incrementally work on improving courses. But to just give you some examples of some things that I do, I've tried to choose examples that most of us are doing. some of these examples of universal design were driven from an efficiency with teaching point of view. So, how can we reduce the admin around our teaching whilst delivering benefits to students? And some of them were really driven by the benefits to students and then looking for ways that we can do that in an efficient means. So the examples that I've got up here for assessment are really are good examples of that, I think. So I teach 2 large courses and coordinate one of them. So one's a large first-year biology course, the second's a large second-year zoology course. And in both those courses, we have a quiz each week of the semester. And as you can imagine, once you've got several hundred students in a course, if you've got a student who's ill or a student who need extra time to complete quizzes, the admin behind that can be a really large job. So we've taken what I've discovered is a universal design approach to that. So we have our quiz, we make the duration of the quiz longer than we think students will actually need to complete it. And that makes sense because what we're really trying to assess here is their knowledge of the topic, not how quickly can they answer the questions. So academically, it makes sense. But it also automatically allows anybody who needs adjustments to quiz time, that time's already automatically included. So from an administrative point of view, we're not having to go in and change the duration of the quizzes for each individual student in the course. We actually make that quiz available for a 24-hour period. So it's a timed quiz. So students get 40 minutes to do it, but they can do it anytime within a 24-hour period. So that works around students' work schedules, study schedules, and it's routine. So it's the same all throughout the semester. So students get used to into that habit and they really like being able to do it at a time that works for them. And of course, the content of the quiz, we don't just use one question style. These quizzes we run online. So we actually use Inspira to do this. Online Blackboard tests also have a variety of different question styles you can use. But I like Inspira because for biology, we often have diagrams that need labeled. So we can do all sorts of drag and drop. We can use short answer questions. We can use multiple choice questions. So there's a variety. And as we all know, different people like different things and think, respond well to different styles of questions and answer. So that's some examples of things that we're already doing that are fit universal design. When I was thinking about in class and what we do there, I find the think, pair, share approach really powerful in very large classes. So for those of you who might not be familiar with it, think, pair, share is where you're asking the students a question. Instead of just getting people to raise their hand, you instruct everybody to have a minute to think on their own without talking and just jot down some notes. So it allows them to kind of engage their own thought processes. And then after a period of time, you get them to share it with the person next to them. And this is a really safe space for them to test out their ideas and get a bit of feedback from the other person before they actually say it out loud to the whole class. So the share is where you get, so the thinking and the pairing gets everybody in the room talking to each other. And then the share is where you ask just a few people to share it with the front of the whole class to enable a discussion. So it's really great for shy students, for quiet students, for people who, I'm somebody who I'm quite uncomfortable in active classes because I like to sit and think myself rather than talk while I'm thinking. So it really works well with a diverse range of students. Another thing that I've done in class is this is really to get feedback from students and get them, which I can then respond to, is often at the end of a class, I'll get students to take a minute and write down a few points. So the muddiest point note is where I'll get them to write down something from today's class that they really still not clear on, that they would like me to spend a bit more time talking about in the next class. And these are collected anonymously at the end of the class. Another name for this is 1-minute essay. It's the same idea. Summarize something you've learned today, write down a question you've still got from today. It's a chance for students to consolidate what they've learned in that class and then share, and then we can collect those. They're anonymous. we get a chance to review it. It really helps us know where the students are at. And then the next class, when we come in, we can talk to that feedback, or we can respond to it online. I think as much as possible now, I'm trying to move a lot of my classes to a workshop style. I really like that way of teaching. It's very much about doing preparation from the teacher's point of view, but the time in class is mostly focused on students interacting with each other and interacting with the material rather than hearing from me as the teacher. So I run workshops in a lot of my courses. During a workshop, which might be an hour or up to 3 hours long, I get students doing a variety of activities. So it's not just one thing. So I mix up hands-on activities with maybe group discussions, with writing and drawing. So again, this is accommodating different students who like and learn from different types of activities. And then just when designing course content, you know, if you're a course coordinator, you're revamping your course, or you're just looking at the whole design, and any of those who've done digital uplifts of their courses will have had to stand back and think about your whole course and how it's structured. If I've got teams of lecturers, we always have meetings together and think about, well, and discuss what's the overall structure for this course. And we as a team identify what the core concepts are that we want students to understand and revisit throughout the whole course. So rather than just those 3 individuals in the team sort of teaching their own chunk in isolation, this is really about trying to tie us all together. Because from the student's perspective, as they travel through the course, you know, they only see one set of content. So the more that you can highlight those core concepts and feed back to them, and then each individual academic brings their own examples and things around it. That's an approach that I take. So it's, again, just trying to make things really clear for students, giving different examples about those concepts in different ways, which some students will relate to some of those examples and some will relate to different examples. And then, of course, a lot of us have got online blended courses, and all of my courses that I teach into are blended. And so when we're looking at designing the online components, the material that's online, we've worked with some really fantastic learning designers within Italy who've really encouraged us to grow and develop the way that we've presented things online. But they're presented in different ways, right? So, you know, some are video, some of it's text, some of it's diagrams, some of it's in stories, and different types of representation will, different students will respond best to different types of representation. And I think just having a bit of variety helps prevent things from becoming boring in the way that they're presented as well. When we're teaching online, I'm still struggling with this to find good ways to do it. I think as we all are, but I think as we get more familiar with teaching on Zoom or teaching online, we're getting better at it. But just trying to make online sessions interactive. So using the chat function or getting students to put their ideas into chat functions. Making sure that every course has got a discussion board available that academics respond to, as well as other students responding to each other's. So setting up a really good culture around how to use the discussion board to ask and answer questions is really useful. And then, of course, Padlet's a popular one at UQ too, which is a great way for academics for collecting what students are thinking about, but also then being able to respond to those. So in most of my courses, I provide several avenues for students to ask questions and respond. Some of those there's usually a discussion board at least. Sometimes there'll be a Padlet. And of course, there's opportunities to talk to us during workshops and in person in classes. So these are just some examples which will probably be familiar to most of the people in the room today that you might already be doing that really fit under universal design. Many of these, and I didn't get into align them with the numbers in the framework, but many of these will actually touch on more than one of those points in the universal design framework. So yeah, just some thoughts and really trying to showcase that it's very highly likely that you are already doing things in your classes that constitute universal design. So it's great to be able to recognize those. And I think what one of the things we're really trying to promote today is understanding what is universal design, looking at what you already do that fits universal design, and then thinking about what's one or two things that you can add. And if you do that each year, then over time, your course becomes increasingly inclusive. But happy to field any questions or any comments. I can see some people in the chat. So Danny's or uses Padlet and has found it really useful. Oh yeah, and allowing students to draw and write in your slides during a Zoom meeting. I haven't done that, but that's a great idea. I've got them to use the whiteboard, but yeah, getting them to annotate your slides, that's a great idea.
And then while we're continuing in the chat, I'll hand back to Gwen for a more of a whole of course planning approach. So back over to you, Gwen. Thanks so much, Louise.
Thanks, Louise. Thanks, Amber. So as you can imagine, having been immersed in UDL for a few years now, we've had quite a few iterations of the course, and we've intentionally worked with UDL checkpoints to try and see how we can make the course very inclusive. So what I've done is listed a few of the examples of things that are happening in the course and how that aligns with the checkpoints from the framework earlier. For example, 1.1, and I've got it open aside here, offer ways of customizing the display of information. So we deliberately, back in 2019, looked back across our resources to make sure they were visually accessible. And that includes using fonts that broaden visual access for people who are blind or visually impaired, but also people with issues around contrast, and the formats as well, in terms of the way we present the information. So slides are presented not just in a single slide per page format. We also do it in 3 slides per page, but we also then have links to other parts of resources that we make available. Chemistry, of course, is a bit like other subjects such as maths or languages. It uses lots of symbols. And so we teach it in the form of being a language learning and use lots of explanations, and the teachers model how we use the terminology, but the symbols and the way of thinking in chemistry. So that aligns with 2.1, which is clarify vocabulary and symbols, which is very discipline specific for us, but it would translate to many other courses. And teaching with, as Louise mentioned, multiple and multimodal representations. So we use the combinations of symbols, words, images, simulations, videos, and hand drawing to help students find the combinations that enable them to construct their understanding of concepts. And they're very carefully considered. We don't just throw heaps of things onto a page. We look at how they different representations combine together to support that without becoming overwhelming. Pre-lecture resources, so we do that 3.1. If you look at activate or supply background knowledge. So we have online modules, which was part of the digital uplift, where we revisit high school concepts, and the students can do that in a self-regulated way, but they're encouraged to do it before the week's lectures. They go back and refresh and activate their high school chemistry concepts, and this sort of starts to build in those self-regulation skills as well. And it enables us to kind of then move forward, knowing students have had help and hopefully have had time to visit those modules. We build in a lot of interaction in the course. We use the Ed discussion site in Blackboard, where students can post anonymously. And as mentioned in the chat, anonymous is important. At times you want students to have their identity as part of the conversation, but giving them opportunity to be anonymous actually is inclusive, because it means they can contribute without fear of being judged or exposing their knowledge and things like that. Ed is great for that, because academics can see who the students are, but they can be anonymous to their peers. We have a particular task which is called Think, Chat, Learn, where again, they're anonymous, but they engage in discussion around concepts in chemistry. And Padlets you can, of course, also set up to be anonymous. So there's lots of ways of getting students to contribute, to actually commit their thinking, and then share and get formative feedback through looking at what their peers have done. We use multimodal feedback. So I've just mentioned peer feedback and we use corrective feedback, of course, where answers and modeled answers are given, but we also create videos of really troublesome concepts to help students get that extra support in their own time when they're studying. So these are things that just sit in Blackboard in different parts of the resources that we're providing. And we all constantly asking students to actually go for an answer, draw it or attempting it, and then to get the feedback that was provided through the course. We also, and I think this is really important for an inclusive course, at the very front of the course, and this is like next week, so it might be a bit short notice, but we are very explicit in setting the expectations of how you learn chemistry, the ways you can think and what you can do, how you can combine resources. We have a student partner generated video about how to learn chemistry, how to think in chemistry. So students explain to students is great. And then we constantly talk about how to use feedback throughout the course. And weekly, there's an announcement goes out on a Monday that sets what's happening, what the activities are, and how to engage with those. So it's really structured. And those, you can see there's 4 different checkpoints listed there. So 8.1 is heighten the salience of goals and objectives. 9.1 is promote expectations and beliefs that optimize motivation. 9.2 facilitate personal coping skills and strategies, and 9.3 develop self-assessment and reflection. And so by actually talking about them and how to learn as part of the course rather than just being content delivery, we really actually support students in some of that guideline 9, which seems perhaps that it's all on the student, but actually those conversations help. We do infographics as well about where things are and how to combine or where to go and get feedback from assessment. So thank you, Amber.
Wow, that's so amazing. That I hope it sounds like the chat's really going off now, so I can see people really sharing their ideas with each other. So that's really sparked some great thinking.
And I know that we have other people doing these things already, which I think it's important that this helps people recognize what they're doing. So
yeah, I think that's the key message. I'm very confident everyone in this room is actually already meeting some of those guidelines, and it's just a reminder to connect your activity with what's on that checkpoint. So feel free to keep asking questions in the chat. We're going to move now back to you again, Gwen. And we maybe we'll go forward into the future now, and maybe imagine that you have applied some of these new strategies, or you've recognized that you're already doing some of these strategies and you want to document that for your own practice or for a promotion, for example. So we'll hand back now to Gwen to talk about how you can check that it's working. Over to you, Gwen.
Thanks again, Amber. So one of the we have formulated a professional learning workshop that will be offered through Italy twice this year. So you can find it on the Italy website, workshop lists, hopefully soon, where the team will help you if you want to actually do something and evaluate it. We can work through that process with academics. But there's several ways that you can look to see if things are working. And the most basic one is actually in the CCATs, because what you observe, and we've observed in our courses, is an increase in student satisfaction. So the students are more inclined to say nice things about the course. There's not silence. I think a lot of us are suffering from low response rates and silence in many of our courses, and I have several courses with that as well. But in Chem 1100 in particular, we do get this positive feedback from students, albeit not huge numbers, but it reflects the idea that they appreciate the efforts that the academics and the approachability of the academics, which you remember, if you go all the way back to the student voice, approachability was something that came out very strongly. There's even a reference there that, of course, I've cherry picked a good example, but a reference to chemistry learning being fun. How often do we hear that? But also the resources. And I think if you're looking at the CCAT comments, you're looking for those interactions, the resources that have been provided, and how students have felt supported and things, other things through the course. So you'll notice in classes, so particularly the workshops, like Louise said, if students feel that they're part of the cohort and that they want to participate in the learning, so they're feeling more included and have access, you'll see actually an increase in numbers in those activities. Or if it's tasks online, you'll see greater task completion, perhaps a greater effort as a measure of working a little bit harder in the course. So one of the side effects, and it's something that you can document, is teaching teams. And again, Louisa talked about how the academics come together and talk about what they want to do and what they want to provide in the course. And we've done that as well. And what we found is that rather than people just tag teaming their various modules or sections that they're teaching, sitting down once or twice a semester became important to share the understanding of what students were thinking, how the feedback was given, and how they were learning through the resources. So that really helped those conversations. The increase in those conversations is evidence of being more inclusive, both because the instructors are part of that learning community with the students. And then improvement in student assessment outcomes. This is what we're hoping that this will all lead to in the end, that all students will have access and participate in the assessment and that their outcomes will improve. So it might not be a dramatic increase in the average for the course score for an exam or a quiz, but it might be a tightening of the spread of the students where the tail kind of comes upwards as they've had a better attempt. So the standard deviation will be a little bit narrower. So there's lots of different ways you can sort of see, is what I'm doing working, essentially. But remember, you don't have to do everything at once. Just do one or two things. And I think Chris is going to lead into that just now. Is that right, Chris?
That's right. Yeah. Okay. But before we go on to that, I just wanted to respond to Gwen made a comment about low CCAT results. So just wanted to have a bit of a chat about you're not entirely reliant on the CCATs or the grades. There are other options available. There's no reason you can't do an informal student check-in, like an early poll, and do that a few times throughout the semester to get a sense of where your students are sitting. And I think that aligns a little bit with Louisa's muddy moment idea. So getting the students to share what's confusing them. And then you can adapt your teaching. And of course, you can discuss your plans with a colleague or a learning designer, and there's no reason you can't ask them to observe a class and discuss afterwards. And there's no. Sometimes it's nice if they can send an email to give you some comments, and that might help with your promotion down the track. And there's one last thing is just course insights. If you haven't used it, it's just a nice way to check on the engagement of students online. And there's I'll just add a link to information about course insights. And it is possible to, if you see that there's some students who aren't engaging early on, there are techniques for, in a friendly way, just send them a private message and say, I just noticed you haven't been engaging in the site. Just want to check that everything's okay. I'm open to have a conversation about how we can move forward. To do it in a welcoming, friendly way. On the right is an example informal feedback plan. I won't go through those details now, but there's that's from the Italy website. And part of any good evaluation is working out what you're going to change. And as Gwen said, we can just start with one thing. So we're going to talk about the 1+ pledge. So we'll go on to that. Next slide, please, Amber. And over to you.
Thank you. And I would just like to reiterate the power of course insights. I'm quite new to UQ, and when I discovered that tool, I was beyond excited. It's a very easy interface. It's a very powerful interface to give you some really straightforward information about who's in your classrooms, when they're engaging in learning activities, and how the assessments are tracking, and to then communicate with students. You can access it through your course on your Blackboard site. I would say hands down my favorite UQ tool. I'm sure there's some other awesome ones around. So we're going to return now back to you to give you a chance to think through some of these great ideas and apply them to your upcoming teaching practice. I can already see that some staff have started working on the shared template. So take some time now to think about a challenge, just one. Let's not list them all. That becomes overwhelming quickly. An inclusion challenge that you're facing, or a pain point or a little barrier you think might be preventing students from fully engaging, all students from fully engaging in the learning in your classes. And then note something, just one thing that you might like to implement this semester to tackle that. I'm going to ask everyone to just turn their cameras off for maybe 10 minutes. I'll set a timer and then we'll come back in about 10 minutes and use this super clever space to share our ideas and get some input. In the meantime, if you've got some questions, pop them in the chat and we'll address them. We've still got a good 20 minutes, 25 minutes to go before the end of the session, so we should have lots of time for questions towards the end. If anyone's having any trouble accessing the document again, please just let us know in the chat and we'll reshare. I can see everyone's really jumping in. We've encouraged everyone to tackle the first and the second column, but if you've got time, feel free to go ahead and fill in the whole lot. And remember, you can just do this in your own space. You don't have to do it on the shared document unless you want to. So I'll turn my camera off now too, and we'll be back in 10 minutes, but we'll be monitoring the chat. Okay, thank you, everybody. That's about the 10-minute mark. So feel free to continue writing down your ideas. Thank you also for staying online for this activity. I'm really impressed that we've only lost about 3 participants. So that's a sign in and of itself that you really have picked up a few things today and you're keen to stay on. So thank you. My learning design student advisor heart is seeing some of the ideas in the shared Padlet. They're really, yeah, and I can see Gwen nodding. It's just so delightful. There's some really sensible, practical strategies there. So thank you for being generous in sharing your thoughts with others on the shared document. And I'm sure there's many, many more great ideas happening in your minds and your thinking. I'd like now perhaps to open up the room to questions. So we've got some amazing people in the room, both hosts and participants. And now is really a chance for you to maybe workshop your idea or get some further feedback. So I might just pause and invite people to raise their hand. And that's an opportunity to ask the group about something you want to try and get some advice. Maybe just share a challenge that you're having and we can give you some places to start. Or maybe you just would like to talk about your idea a little bit more. If you're a verbal thinker, that's certainly me, as Chris would know. Sometimes talking about it out loud is a very helpful strategy. And you might also just use the chat as well. So I'll just mute and let people put their hand up or use the chat and we'll answer your questions as we go. Charlotte, I can see you've unmuted. Would you like to ask a question or was that an accident? Might have been an accident. No worries, Charlotte. I might throw to the room, I can see that the challenge of having diverse language groups in the classroom and having new international students who may have English as a... Oh, Peter's got a question. I'll come back to the international student question and we'll move to Peter's question. Neurodiversity, Peter, and how we can support those practices. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I've got a
just
few
whether
ideas. I'll let others jump in. Go ahead, Peter.
I was just going to say it's in my field, which is technology, we have a higher representation of neurodiverse people, both in learning but also in industry. And I'm just wondering if there's any kind of useful guidelines or things that we should be considering when it comes to that. A lot of our teaching is studio-based. And so that can be very confronting sometimes and very difficult to manage across, for example, a 3-hour studio.
Yeah, does anyone want to jump in with some ideas? Gwen, please go ahead.
I was just going to say that there's actually some good advice in literature around that, which I can probably point to. But the universal design being a holistic approach means that a lot of the adjustments that we make in practice or in the resources sort of do increase the access for neurodiverse students. But I think that from the students' feedback we had, there was mention of the fact that when the lecturers move around the room, and it might not, if you've got a small class, it might not apply in the same way. But if you're in one of the, for example, in Building 11A, Mod West workshop rooms, and the students are working, actually moving around and just pausing at different points of the room enables students who may not feel that they can sort of ask questions or interact in a normal teaching, and when I say normal, a traditional teaching space, they or even just sitting down at the tables. I'll tell you what, a big tip for me is that encouraging the tutors to sit at the tables when they ask if their students need any help improves the access and the conversation between students, particularly for neurodiverse students, because it's a more direct interaction. But as I said, I'm not an expert. There are a whole range of strategies that we could probably connect you to, if that would be useful. But people who are participating today may have some other suggestions.
Can I
Thank you.
perhaps jump in here?
Louise,
Sorry,
go ahead.
Louise here. Yeah, I guess, can I just raise awareness that UQ has a neurodiversity hub? And so this is a group within student services where neurodiverse students can get together and share approaches. So it's not really from within the classroom, it sits outside of courses and teaching. But I'm wondering, from wearing my hat in the Faculty of Science, whether there might be an opportunity for that group to perhaps provide some suggestions or some support that we can disseminate amongst academics. But I just did want to, with this group here, just let you know that there is a neurodiversity hub at UQ who support learning strategies for that group of students.
Thanks, Louise. I've shared the link in the chat to the universe. My reflection is, and I'll be honest, I came to Universal Design for Learning thinking about exactly this, Peter, thinking about the different neurodivergent students I had in my room and thinking about my teaching practice and how there was clearly a gap between those, the way I like to learn and the way many of my students were experiencing learning. I think the other thing to note is that Universal Design for Learning is about improving the inclusion in your room for everyone, but there'll be times when we can't meet everyone's needs. And I know from my own personal experience in my family, living with ADHD is a very different type of learning to maybe being on the autism spectrum. So, and it will be challenging at times to meet both those students' needs in the classroom at the same time, but maybe across the course, we've got opportunities for both those students, for example, to show their strengths. But just inquiring and noticing is the first step, I think, for me, was my teaching practice. And then looking back to the principles and guidelines for further kind of resources or ideas. Thank you. That's a really sensible question.
Sorry, if I could just cut in now. I think there's two things that occur to me. Perhaps Peter is breaking tasks down into smaller parts, and to provide more scaffolding for students that helps everybody in the room. And also, if it's possible to provide an anonymous channel for those questions, like a suggestion box or a Padlet or something like that. I know I say Padlet too often, but yeah, some way so that it's not just about raising hands and having someone come over and being the center of attention. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks everyone. And Gwen, if you've got resources that are easy to hand, I'd love them. That would be fantastic.
Great, and I can see Danny in the chat is working on a student partnership project. So Danny, that sounds exciting. We might follow up with you. Greg's mentioned the challenge of finding appropriate learning classrooms. I know that's a challenge for everyone, and I think it is a priority for the university to continue to improve our infrastructure in order to enable us to have more inclusive classrooms. So that's good. Would anyone else like to share a challenge that they'd like to discuss further? I can see a question there about alternative information authority. I don't recall who mentioned that. Did anybody mention that in particular? Kenneth, are you maybe referring to thinking about who holds authority in the classroom? Was that maybe what we were referring to? And there was reference to a reading list. If anyone recalls that, please feel free to respond in the chat. We've got a good 5 minutes left. So I might maybe return to the international student or English as an additional language issue, which I think there's some really good strategies already being shared in the shared document. Would anyone like to share their experiences of supporting those students in the classroom to really demonstrate their learning best? And then we can probably wrap up after that. Gwen or Louise, do you have any particular tips that come to mind that have worked for you or improved the experience?
So just for a long time, we've been very mindful of the fact that our international students don't necessarily understand lay language or common terms that we might use in our vocabulary when giving examples. So we've made sure that that those are removed in a sense. But there's also some clarification or opportunity for students to clarify as well. A good tip is also, you might actually celebrate the diversity in language in your cohort. Sometimes asking students to share the words in their own language that they might use for something specific, just for a moment in class, is a good way of being inclusive. It respects the fact that that there is different languages and that sometimes things don't always translate the same way.
Yeah. I think another good example is, if you can, taking the time at the beginning of a course to hear from your students and their experiences and share examples that you might then come back to in your own teaching. So that can be something simple like the kinds of movies or music they're into that will clearly be not relevant to everybody. But getting more familiar with the students' experiences, we're probably familiar with maybe Australian or Brisbane students' experiences, but getting more familiar with who else is in the room and then being able to use some of those examples later in your practice can be also very powerful. Louise, I see you've got your microphone on. Anything you wanna share?
Yeah, I was just going to come back to the idea of course design, particularly in blended courses. So one thing that I'm really conscious of is if there's particular core concepts and key words that I include those in either the online learning, so it's in a revisitable format, whether it's in the online learning or on, written explicitly on lecture notes, but a place where it's not just spoken about or provided in context, but it's very explicit. So, and that's good learning for all students, right? Not just international students, but yeah, that's where they get to see the spelling and hear the sound of the words at the same time in an online format that they can revisit many times is useful.
Yeah, and that's such a good example because that's a strategy that helps a large range of learners. Sometimes, particularly when you're new to an area, trying to work out what's a priority or what's important can be quite challenging. So some students with neurodiversity can find that challenging, for example, but so can students from another academic culture or where there's a large number of new things happening for them at the same time. Which thing they need to study or which where they should give their attention can be really tricky. And that's such a perfect example of how a strategy like providing a glossary or providing a list of key terms to focus on helps so many students. Thank you. So we are bang on time, maybe a little bit early. So if anyone wants to jump in with other questions, feel free to. And I can see people are sharing some great ideas in the chat. Thank you. But really, it's time to wrap up and provide you with a couple of places you might continue to explore and apply the principles. Firstly, the Universal Design for Learning guidelines with the interactive link that takes you out to resources is that first link there. You can actually just Google Universal Design for Learning guidelines and you'll land. So taking some time maybe to go back and think of one or two of those points that you really want to get a handle on and maybe clarify, oh yes, actually now I know more about that. I am doing that in the classroom. The interactivity on this side is very helpful. The Australian Disability Clearinghouse on Education and Training is how I first came across Universal Design for Learning principles and also the +1 pledge, or the idea of just applying one, just trying one new thing in your classroom this coming semester. So that's tertiary education focused. It's Australian focused. I think it's government funded, so they run a large range of free sessions, which are very much in our context, quite frequently, maybe fortnightly, monthly, there's free sessions coming up. So I'd encourage you to sign up to the newsletter if that's your thing. And you can actually see or publish your own pledge on their website if you want to, or see what others are doing across Australia. So that can be kind of motivating. If that works for you, that can be a motivational tool. The information around the innovation grant that Gwen and team have been working on is there, and I believe that website will be updated with the workshops that are coming up this year. It's not there live yet, but I'm sure it's coming soon. And that brings me to the last amazing resource that will be available to you this year, and that's the modules that Gwen and team have developed out of the research they've done this year. So it's highly relevant to our context. Gwen, did you want to talk a little bit more about these modules at all?
Thanks, Amber. So these in the process of being imported into Workday as we speak, and so they should appear at some point. And basically, they're very UQ contextualized, and they've come out of the project, which, as I said at the start, has been informed by UQ academics, various stakeholders, and the students. And so they are designed for you to be able to have for your APD because they're a formal Workday module. So this is staff development. But if you want to dig in more, the modules are self-regulated. There's interactive questions and tasks, but there's also videos and examples and strategies and tips from students and links to lots of resources, including, for example, like the Neurodiversity Hub and other. What we haven't done is differentiated different groups that exist amongst our student cohort, but we've given lots and lots of links to different people who are working on campus to support these different groups of students. And there's a very wide range of people that are doing that, which is great. The other thing to mention that you did before is that this module, if it triggers your interest and you want to actually do something formal around doing a change, come along to the workshops, and that will again be somewhere where you can get support in the process.
Gwen, are you okay for me to share the direct Articulate Rise link, or would you prefer to wait until it's accessible on
I think
the
possibly,
website?
as I said, there's people playing around with things like SCORM, which sounds like some sort of worm that you need to take a tablet for. Peter probably knows what it is, but it may not function exactly right this week as it's going over.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
so it will appear as something that's there, and hopefully very soon, within the next few weeks. So.
Yeah, and it'll definitely be well advertised, so watch this space. And I know there was a mention earlier in the chat around whether we can use the guidelines as questions to help us frame our thinking, and I believe, Gwen, the diagnostic tool you developed does exactly that.
Yes.
So yes,
yes.
Is the answer to that question.
That is linked out of the module and also in the workshop, so.
Yeah, and I've had one more question. How long do you think it might take to work your way through the module as a guesstimate, Gwen?
Well, the design
so staff can,
too long,
yeah.
So maybe 20 minutes.
Mm.
Yes, I know there's longer ones there.
Yeah, I thought it's very sensibly designed. It's not days or weeks of work. It's definitely an achievable
a launch site, things that people may not know or want to know, and then it triggers that next step. So
wonderful. Gwen and Louise, thank you so much for your generosity and time in this workshop. Thank you for the attendance and for all the generous sharing of ideas in the shared document. It's definitely warmed my heart, and we'll be sharing these resources as an email after the session. So thank you, everybody. You're free to go and take a break, and we'll probably see you online in another Ready to Teach Week workshop sometime soon. Take care.
All the best for your teaching, everyone. Thank you for coming along.
Yes.
Thank you, Chris and Amber.
Thank you.
Yes, big thank you to Chris and Amber too.
I love the comment around SCORM being in Doctor Who.
Oh. Now I've crossed a line because I know what SCORM is now. I'm just like, oh yeah, that thing. It's a really strange name. Take care, everybody.
I see that we've got a poll open if anyone would like to quickly address that before you leave. Thank you so much for attending today. There was some beautiful sharing. Thank you.
Yeah, apologies. Please provide any feedback if you like in the poll. Thanks to whoever launched that. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to jump out of the session. I think we had about 40 participants right through till the end. I'm really pleased with that.
That's great. Well done.
Yeah. Thanks, Tanya, for your help.
That last little bit. I think that's really great.
Yes.
Thanks, guys.